morning, my beloved friends. Happy first Sunday of Advent, Year B. Welcome to a new season of grace, of God's love, of new horizons and new opportunities, of long stretch of divine second chances. And welcome indeed to today's homily highlights. Our theme for today is Advent Disposition, because today is the first Sunday of Advent. And it is important for us to examine the dispositions that should accompany the Advent season. Because disposition is indeed the key to right preparation, acquisition, and possession. We know that we can look at the word Advent from three senses, knowing that Advent is all about the coming of Jesus, the one that happened in history that we want to reenact this time around, to put ourselves in that position of our forefathers who expected Christ. The one that happens every day amidst us, even in the liturgy, and the different persuasions of Jesus' coming. We call that one the liturgical coming of Christ. The other one is historical. And then the other one that we expect that will happen at the end of time, both end of time of each and every one's individual lives, and the end of time in the parousia. That is the eschatological coming of Christ. So the emphasis is all about coming. And Jesus wants to come. He's our King and He's our friend. He wants to come to us in all aspects. And so that's why we said it is opposite for us to consider what dispositions should accompany our expectation of His coming. And the readings of today provide three main dispositions that are required. The first is what we find in the first reading. The disposition of clay in the potter's hand. That's what we find in that beautiful prophecy of Isaiah chapter 63 that belongs to the third section of Isaiah's books that we call the Trito Isaiah. It is an expression of a people in need, a people who were crushed and broken in Babylonian exile. A people who, with hindsight now, had seen that their problems were their own faults, that they had abandoned God, that they didn't just break commandments of God, that they broke themselves against commandments of God. And that the sins that they were now suffering from were their own sins. And so they were suffering, and with hindsight, they were longing for a return to God's grace, for a return of God in their life. And when they now said that like a clay in the potter's hand, you discover that it's an expression that indicates surrender, indicates desire, indicates yearning for God. And when we think about it, it reminds us also that is also the disposition that should accompany us within this Advent season. A disposition of surrender, a disposition of self-realization and accusation, realizing that what we have suffered all this long, especially in our country, Nigeria, is a result of our own moral failures. Self-accusation, self-indictment, introspection, understanding that the fault is not another person, not pointing fingers, but realizing truly that we are the architect of our problems. A penitential disposition in which we now surrender to God, expect long for God, ask God to enlighten us. And it is this expectation, this yearning, this desire that is captured in the beautiful responsorial psalm of today in Psalm 80, where we are asking the light of God to shed upon us that we may be saved. So the first disposition according to the readings of today is the disposition of a clay in a potter's hand. The second disposition, we find it in the second reading of today, Paul's address to the Corinthians. The disposition of application of His grace, waiting while applying His grace. Because God has enriched each and every one of us with something to wait for Him. So the waiting of God's coming is not supposed to be an idle waiting. No. We hope, but we are meant to cope. Late Fada talked about hoping and coping. That while we keep on hoping for God's glory to manifest at the opportune time, we also keep coping with the graces He has made available for us. So while our feet are still in the dust of activity, our hopes are also raised in the glory of expectation. It is this hoping and coping that built our entire existence. It is important that we realize that we are supposed to be doing something with the graces God has invested in us while waiting for God. That is the second disposition. So it is not just about your own inspiration, your emotional disposition, but even your action. What are you doing while you are waiting for God? How are you applying His graces that He has given you, the favors that He has endowed you with? How are you applying it for the advancement of this kingdom that will materialize in its fullness when He comes? And then number three, the third disposition that the gospel now recommends is the disposition of a gatekeeper waiting for the master's return. A gatekeeper who knows that his master will definitely return, who loves his master, and who is eagerly with excitement waiting at the door. And Jesus says it is important that this gatekeeper, which is now all of us, stays awake. You must stay awake and you must be ready for action. Gird your loins. Stay awake and watch. Because at the end of the day, what the gatekeeper does is to watch. He watches for, but he also watches against. He watches for the master's return because the owner of the house will come in. So he watches, he looks out for the master's return. So the Advent is a time of sensitivity, a time of watching for, a time of looking out for the different places and persuasions where God comes into our life. But the gatekeeper also watches against thieves and intruders, armed robbers, those who are not the owners of the house that will want to come in to plunder. And what are those things? They are the things that make us sleep. Sins. There is no sin that is mechanical to the extent that it happens on us suddenly. No, they begin from somewhere. Someone who is awake knows that this sin is coming from here. All the things that will lead him to sin, all the opportunities, all the occasions of sins, he watches out for against them and tries to avoid them even when they are their preliminaries. It was Mark Twain that says it is better to shun the bait than to struggle in the snare. It is important that the gatekeeper realizes this and tries to watch against the thieves of our souls. Those things that make us sleep. Jesus says we must not sleep because sleep is a figurative expression for the dullness of soul. That time where we put our defenses down. That times when we put our guard down. That times when we are no longer morally and spiritually sensitive for His coming. That is the sleep. It is at the moment of sleep that the devil will sow his tares, as we see in Matthew chapter 13, verse 25. When the owner of the vineyard slept, the enemy came in to sow tares in his vineyard. It is at the moment of sleep that the Delilahs of our life will cut our hair. And that hair signifies the strength and glory that God has bequeathed on each and every one of us. So Jesus is saying, do not sleep. Do not relapse into sin, because sin is by its very nature very intoxicating. Very intoxicating and enslaving. It has a way of capturing your entire boat of Christian life and capsizing it. So we must not sleep. We must stay awake in a state of grace. We must stay awake to watch for and to watch again. These are the dispositions that should accompany us as Christians. So these three principal dispositions are what the readings of today convey to us. A disposition of yearning, a disposition of action, and a disposition of staying awake. We ask God to give us this grace in this Advent season, so that this season will be a very fruitful one, so that we may really expect God and really desire God, really open our hearts with excitement and love, and yearn for His loving touch, looking at ourselves and realizing that we're not what we're supposed to do, and that we may apply all He has given to us to fruitful ventures at the end of the day, that we may stay awake, so that whenever He comes, in the different situations in which He's going to come in this Christmas season, we'll be able to stand up to Him with joy and in confidence, just like a loving son waits for the loving arms of the loving Father when the Father returns. I pray that the Master will find us ready whenever and wherever He comes, and that we may be counted those worthy enough for the dividends of eternal glory. We make this prayer for myself and for you through Christ our Lord, even as I wish you a very fruitful journey through the season of Advent and the eventual triumph during the period of Christmas. Happy Sunday. God bless you. Bye. Remember to share.